Russia's battlefield losses in the war in Ukraine have reached 1,238,710 servicemen, of which 1,310 were eliminated in the past 24 hours, the General Staff of Ukrainian Armed Forces reported on January 30. Apart from the losses among the military personnel, the Russian army also suffered heavy losses in terms of military equipment and weapons throughout the war and in the past day. Thus, the number of destroyed Russian military equipment has reached 11,614 tanks, 36,748 artillery systems, 23,969 armored fighting vehicles since the start of full-fledged invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces said 66 combat clashes occurred at the frontline in the past 24 hours despite the Kremlin's earlier announcement that it would stop hostilities until February 1 upon U.S. President Donald Trump's request. Russian troops launched artillery shelling particularly on the areas of settlements of Yanzalivka, Yasna Polyana, Hremyak, Buchki of Chernihiv region, Betsalivka, Rizivka, Tovstodubovo, Rogozn of Sumy region. In the Pivnikno-Slobozhenskaya and Russia's Kursk region. Russian forces launched 54 strikes on populated areas and Ukrainian positions, including 2 strikes using multiple launch rocket systems. In the Pivdeno-Slobozhensky sector, Russian troops attacked 6 times near Staritsya, Prilipka, and Vovchansk, with 2 engagements still underway. Meanwhile, Russian troops are attempting to advance toward Kirilivka, Petropavlivka, and Novosanov in embattled Kupiansk city in northeastern Kharkiv region. 4 clashes occurred in this area, 2 of which are ongoing. Moreover, Ukrainian troops repelled 4 Russian assaults near Zarikn and toward Druzhyabivka and Drobyshiv in Lyman sector, with 2 battles still underway. Russian forces also made 3 attempts to advance toward Zakitin and in the Dranivka area in Sloviansk direction, with 1 clash still in progress. Moreover, the General Staff reported 11 attacks in the Kostantinivka sector near Sherbanivka and Sofiivka, as well as toward Ilanivka, Stepanivka, and Novopavlivka. Additionally, Russian forces carried out 25 attempts to dislodge Ukrainian forces near Mirnohrad, Pokrovsk, Kotlin, Yudakny, Molodetsk, Filia, and toward Ivanivka and Rodinsk. Ukrainian defense forces have repelled 23 of these attacks so far.
The Ukrainian armed forces have reserves for an offensive, said political scientist, retired colonel of the Russian armed forces, and military analyst Eduard Basurin. His words were quoted by military correspondent Yuri Kotenok on his Telegram channel. Basurin expressed the opinion that the Ukrainian armed forces have no critical problems with reserves and weapons, but it will be difficult for them to muster forces for a counter-offensive. However, a counter-offensive is possible. The Ukrainian armed forces have already partially launched an offensive near Kupiansk. It will be difficult for the enemy to muster a large number of reserves for an attack, but in theory it is possible. The expert shared his concerns. The enemy has reserves and weapons for a lightning attack. The US supplies the Ukrainian armed forces with 15 aircraft, weapons and ammunition every day, said Basurin, who believes the enemy's capabilities should not be underestimated. Earlier, Major General Vladimir Popov suggested that the Ukrainian armed forces could launch a counter-offensive in March or April 2026. He deemed any earlier date impossible due to weather conditions. Heavy snow cover would lead to severe soil moisture, making the movement of armored vehicles and automobiles impossible. Earlier, Ukrainian Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky announced preparations for a new counter-offensive. He argued that Ukraine would not be able to succeed if its troops remained solely on the defensive, and insisted on the need to seize the initiative at the front. Military analysts point out that the situation around Kupiansk now has direct implications for Ukraine's political future. They do not rule out that Syrskyi was tasked with creating serious problems for Russian forces, specifically on this sector of the front. Ukrainian command has reportedly redeployed some of its most capable reserves to the Kupiansk area. In this case, Alexander Syrskyi said Russian troops continue to rely on advancing in small infantry groups and that timely detection and destruction of such groups required constant battlefield monitoring, close coordination between units, and flexible tactical decisions. Syrskyi said he and unit commanders were analyzing the course of fighting on the ground as Ukraine sought to blunt Russia's attacks in the sector. Syrskyi said Ukrainian forces were paying particular attention to strengthening unmanned systems units, including wider use of strike drones and the development of logistics using robotic systems. The war is changing, and we are changing our approaches to fighting it. Scaling up modern technologies directly affects the effectiveness of combat operations and helps save the lives of Ukrainian soldiers, he added. Ukraine's commander-in-chief said he was continuing work on the Pokrovsk and Ocheretine fronts in eastern Ukraine, describing the situation as difficult and saying there had been about 400 combat clashes there over the past week. Syrskyi said Russian forces were trying to break through, increasing pressure and bringing up reserves. Our key task is to inflict maximum losses on the enemy, destroy their reserves, and consistently reduce their offensive potential, he said.
A politician in Russia's Samara region faces a criminal case for suggesting to stop the Kremlin's war of invasion in Ukraine. A criminal case against 69-year-old Grigory Yeremyev, a member of the Russian Democratic Party, was submitted to the Leninsky District Court of Samara on January 28 under the article on discrediting the armed forces of the Russian Federation after the politician's anti-war speech in local parliament. Grigory Yeremyev was detained after his speech in the regional parliament in Samara last month. During his speech, Yeremyev took a strong stand against the war in Ukraine, stating that the war had failed and emphasizing that its continuation meant the destruction of human lives, as well as the irrational waste of financial and material resources. Yeremyev was not allowed to finish his speech, and his microphone was turned off. After that, lawmakers filed a complaint with the police against the retired politician. Yeremyev confirmed to local media that after his speech at the Samara Duma at the end of December, a protocol was drawn up against him for discrediting the army, including for demanding an end to the special military operation, a term used to describe Russia's war in Ukraine, and calling on deputies to admit guilt for the failure and apologize to citizens. According to Yeremyev, after his speech, the deputies unanimously voted to report his remarks. At the police station, the politician was told that if he continued to make similar remarks, he would be charged under a criminal article. Yeremyev added that he does not agree with the protocol, as there are no grounds for drawing it up, but at the police department they said the order came from above. These are normal things, the authorities are defending themselves, so many people have already been tried, we already have plenty of protocols for discreditation, Yeremyev said. He also added that a second case has been initiated under the article on abuse of freedom of mass information under Article 13.15 of the Administrative Code for statements about election fraud in the Samara region, but a protocol has not yet been drawn up. A second linguistic examination has now been scheduled.